Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Pearsall, and I am really glad to be able to join you all today for what is the final in our live stream series for this school year. And then for this last one, we've got an awesome live question and answer session with Keeth Coach Rudy Matheny on social emotional learning and student mental health. And this is also really special because this is one that's, if you've been joining us in the social emotional learning and education community, or if you've been joining us from our Second Step community, or if you're a follower of Committee for Children's social media, we're bringing everybody together for this one, for our last one. It's a big finale, and I'm really pleased to be able to have you all join us today. I'd like to begin with land acknowledgement. Committee for Children's offices sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the first people of Seattle, Washington, the Duwamish tribe. As we honor the Duwamish people and their ancestors, it's also important that we consider our place in the past, present, and future history of the Indigenous peoples of our region, as well as how we can best support them. Thank you. Keith, I'd love to invite you to come on camera now, and so I'll introduce you to the new audience. Hi. So for those of you who know Keith, he needs no introduction. For those of you who don't know Keith, I'm really pleased to be able to bring him to y'all today. Keith, he's known far and wide as Coach Rudy. He is the co-author of School Connect, a highly acclaimed research and evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum. He's also the driving force behind Austin ISD's innovative SEL freshman seminar. Keith is a frequent public speaker and keynote speaker on social emotional learning, student engagement, and relationship supports for educators. His work has been featured in national webinars, magazine articles, and journals of best practices, including recent articles in The Atlantic, Facebook Education, and EdWeek. He's also recently been featured in Committee for Children webinars, so which should rate far above all of those other ones, I'm sure. Why did you laugh?
No, sorry. They do. They for sure do. Yeah.
And finally, Keith is a member of the Aspen Institute's Council of Distinguished Educators. He is directly connected with the national leadership, current research, and best practices in the field. In the past 4 years, Keith has helped launch SEL programs in over 360 schools. Keith, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate having you here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here and excited to interact with your audience. And what a critical time for SEL and a great opportunity to share some ideas and thoughts with the Committee for Children audience and the wider SEL audience.
Yeah. So the topic today is the connection between social emotional learning and student mental health, which has been, goes without saying that this year has been stressful for student mental health. But I think more than that, it's brought attention to issues that have been around since long before COVID-19. Yeah. So what is this connection between social emotional learning and mental health? Why is this important for us to recognize?
Well, so first off, let's just kind of talk about where we are. So we had a mental health crisis before COVID even started. And whenever there is a crisis like COVID, some traumatic experience in the world, what happens is there's these three waves. First, that physical crisis itself, the actual wave of that crisis. Then there's the economic wave that is the fallout of that crisis. And then for often a decade after that crisis, there is this mental health cleanup, as we're dealing with the traumas that people have experienced during that time. And all of us have been in this storm. I mean, it's like a worldwide version of this kind of a storm. And, some of us have been in a mild sprinkle and some of us have been a terrifying tornado, but we've all been in the storm. And many of us have experienced significant trauma, and that is definitely going to impact our overall mental health. A couple of statistics. Early on in the pandemic, there was a Gallup poll that said about 45% of the population was reporting a significant change in their mental health. And then the summer after the pandemic started, they did a Harris poll with teenagers, and they found that 7 out of 10 teenagers reported having a significant mental health issue. And 81% of teenagers have said that mental health is one of the biggest issues facing their age group. So this is definitely something important. Now, how does it tie into SEL? Well, so I like to think about this around a metaphor of the lake, the river, and the waterfall. And I shared this in the Committee for Children webinar that you
Mhm.
guys can access. By the way, if you like this session and you haven't seen the Committee for Children video,
Mhm.
that's the 1 hour webinar, you really should consider doing that. I'm sure it'll be in some of the follow-up resources from
Yeah,
this session.
we'll stick a link
But
up in the chat for this too. So everybody, if you're watching this live, we'll put it up in a minute or two. If you're watching this recording, it's already there.
Oh, great. So anyway, but that's a great way for you to see this more in depth and see the visuals and resources off of it. But here's the metaphor. So I want you to imagine a beautiful lake that feeds into a raging river that feeds into a gigantic waterfall. And you're relaxing on a summer day and you're listening to the gurgle of the rapids when all of a sudden you see a child in the rapids headed towards a waterfall. And you're like, oh my gosh, there's a child in the rapids headed towards a waterfall, and you don't even take off your clothes. You just dive into the water and you swim out, and you grab that kid. You fight the current. You get them back to the beach. Are you okay? Are you okay? And as you're huffing and puffing and the child is huffing and puffing, you look up the river to the lake. And at the lake, you see there are thousands of kids playing in the lake, and some of them are getting into the mouth of the river. And you're like, no, no, no. Somebody has got to go up there to that lake and teach those kids to stay out of the river. But you can't do it because if you leave your current spot, the kids in the river are going to go over the tragic waterfall. So the point of this little metaphor is that is MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. The lake is proactive education. It is teaching students skills ahead of challenges. Teaching kids how to manage emotions, or how to self-advocate, or how to build healthy relationships, or maybe even induce positive emotions. These kinds of things make it less likely for us to get stuck in the river, which is where we're struggling with big challenges, and less likely for those challenges to escalate to crisis, which is the waterfall. And so a lot of times with mental health, we think about mental health as too crisis oriented, that we're waiting for people to be in crisis before we get them help. That's not a healthy system. We need to be thinking about mental health as a proactive strategy, not as a reactive strategy. So what can we do proactively that's going to better equip our students around their mental health, teaching them emotional awareness and emotional management skills, self-advocacy skills, those kinds of relationship skills? Those skills are going to pay off in a big way in reducing the number of students who might be suffering with anxiety or depression. It's not going to eliminate, because obviously sometimes these things are chemical, but if we can even just reduce some of that, and even the students that are fighting that struggle, if we can get the early student to recognize that struggle and advocate and access resources, that's a really big deal. But the system that we have currently is too waterfall oriented. We need to move this work to the lake, and that's what SEL is. SEL is that proactive approach to skill building that can really help around mental health, especially in dysregulating times like these.
So I think you mentioned at the top some really kind of dire statistics about adolescents and about teenagers and how their mental health has been affected over the last year. I think something that I see questions for all the time is what does social emotional learning look like at the secondary level for teenagers? I think for so long the industry has been really focused on social emotional learning for younger kids. It's sort of the Wild West of social emotional learning right now, bringing it into high schools.
Yeah, so obviously that's my niche, my niche. That's where I've been doing this work for many years. And I think it is really a mistake to think that SEL is only for younger grades. Some of the most turbulent times in our lives are in our teenage years. And having these skills and supports in those turbulent times can be really important for students. So anyway, I think the way this should look at the secondary level, there's two practices that I think are the best practices. My favorite practice is a dedicated course at transition points. So a 6th grade course in middle school or a 9th grade course in high school. Why a course? Well, at the secondary level, our teachers tend to be more subject identity focused. So I'm a 7th grade teacher. I don't think of myself as a 7th grade teacher. I think of myself as a math teacher, right? And because of this, I'm subject focused. My identity is there. And, in order for me to really get excited about something, often it's much better if it's my subject. So if I can have a dedicated course where your job is to teach SEL in transition to kids that are joining the middle school in 6th grade or joining the high school in 9th grade, then this becomes my identity. My subject area is I teach SEL. I'm an SEL teacher. And now I prep for that. I'm innovative with that. I'm always doing work and support and creating lessons for that. And the fidelity goes through the roof. The quality of instruction goes through the roof, and students get it like a subject area. Then one of the things I talk about all the time is this 5th core approach that we have: math, science, English, social studies, and then we need to have social emotional learning, because SEL is as core to student success as is any core subject, and it needs to be treated as such. So if we had a dedicated course like this where students could really get deep instruction in social emotional learning at that transition point when they're redefining their behavior in this new space, then we can really give an intervention that will dramatically affect their results the rest of the years on that campus. And so that's why I really love the dedicated course. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to still do, integration and other pieces off of that and reinforcement, but that dedicated course is just a higher level depth of instruction. Now, the second practice that is very common in the secondary level is an advisory type of program. And while I really love the fact that what's great about advisory is every teacher is teaching it, so every teacher is getting exposed to it, it's a little easier for them to learn the common language. That's a really big benefit. But one of the challenges with advisory is too often in schools, the fidelity is really low, and that many of the teachers or teaching advisory will be like, I'm not really that bought in, it's not my thing. And so what ends up happening is this kind of rule of thirds is what I often find. We have a third of the teachers that really are into it and they're going to do a great job and they're fabulous. We have a third of the teachers that, I'm a good teacher, I'm going to do what good teachers do, I'm probably going to do this as long as I'm not overwhelmed. And then you have about a third of the teachers that say, this isn't my thing, I'm not going to do this unless somebody's there making me do this. And so what happens is the quality of explicit instruction is not as high. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. Some of the best SEL programs at the secondary level are advisory programs. But in order to make an advisory program really strong, you've got to really work on buy-in. Your administrators have to be really big on, catching teachers doing it right, supporting the explicit instruction, making it a big deal. So what I like to say is it takes a lot more lift to get that plane off the ground, the advisory plane off the ground, but it will pay off in a huge payload across your campus. Whereas the dedicated class, all you got to do is cherry pick the 3 teachers that really love SEL on your campus, and then give them training, support, curriculum, and a dedicated space. And they will transform the campus by teaching these skills deeply to students. And then they become like on-campus SEL coaches to train the teachers how to integrate some of the skills that they're teaching in the dedicated class. Either practice works. I've just found a lot more success with the dedicated class quicker. And with the advisory class, I think it can be very effective, but there's often a little bit higher failure rate on that program.
Yeah. I think another thing that we've heard is that there's people who are very interested in social emotional learning to support students right now coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. But people are saying, I don't know how I'm going to have time to do it, because we're also trying to address the learning loss that students have experienced over the last year. Yeah. How do you respond to that? How do you suggest that educators who want to do this work but are meeting that kind of resistance respond?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And my first comment is this whole concept of learning loss. I don't fully buy into it. What did we lose versus who? Everyone else has been in a pandemic. I mean, who do we take a step back against? It's this concept that we're supposed to be at a specific place. I don't think that's the case. We're in a race in theory to nowhere sometimes. And what's most important, that we are making sure that kids totally understand full content in this moment, or that we're helping them recover from what has been a really traumatic and challenging time. They are missing those social connections. They haven't had the kind of workout on their social skills. They possibly have been struggling with emotional management skills. And my point is, we have to meet those Maslow hierarchy of needs, those lower needs first, before we can really get to those higher needs. The concept of Maslow's before Bloom's. We got to help students feel safe and connected and regulated before we can really get them to achieve at their highest level as students. Don't get me wrong. I know content is important. I believe in content, but SEL is not a time taker. It's a time maker. When students don't feel like their needs are being met, often we'll see all kinds of issues. We see, all kinds of disruptions. If I have unmet needs, I'm probably not going to achieve at the same level. My behavior is possibly going to change. They're more likely for me to have crises. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure we're meeting those needs, making kids feel safe, getting needy kids to quality services. And the better you are at meeting those, the stronger the foundation, the taller the building. Now I can get to that higher level types of thinking and learning. But I think SEL is just really critical right now. And like I said, it's a time maker. It's not a time taker, because every minute I spend teaching kids to manage emotions is 11 minutes I don't spend managing their emotions. Every minute I spend teaching kids to resolve conflicts is 11 minutes I don't spend resolving their conflicts, bouncing back from setbacks, on and on. And there's data that supports that. So this is really efficient use of your time and creates more time for quality instruction.
Well, I wish we had more time to cover more questions, but we're kind of running up at the end of our time.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry, Matt.
I know it went quick, didn't it?
Got me going. Geez.
Well, I appreciate you coming. It's always fantastic to be able to hear from you. And for people who would like to hear more from you, they have this opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about this event that's coming up?
Oh, yeah. I'm super excited. Castle is hosting an event tomorrow, the 18th. It's a Castle National webinar around building connections, social emotional learning in young people's future. And I had a class that was featured in the Atlantic in 2017, and those kids have now kind of graduating from college. And so they invited 3 students from that class who've now graduated from college to talk about, their inspiring SEL stories and some powerful SEL insights. I highly recommend joining. It'll be really awesome to see and hear from these kids.
Oh, that's great. I had no idea that that's what this was. And I think I'm going to check it out myself now. Thank you.
Nice. And the link right there, if you use your QR reader, there's the link right there that'll take you to register for the event.
Awesome. And I also want to let everybody know that that if you want to continue conversations like these, Committee for Children helps run the SEL education community on Facebook, where you can come and you can connect with SEL champions and thought leaders from around the world, and continue to have conversations like these. We'd love to. If you're a member already and you're watching it there, thank you for joining us. And if you haven't joined yet, we highly encourage you to go check it out. It's free, public, and we'd love to have you come and join our community of practice there. So thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure. This is the last one of these we're doing, but we will be back in the fall with more live streams of various different kinds. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you all then. So everybody, have a great summer or winter, depending on which hemisphere you're in. And we will see you in the fall. Take care, everybody.
Have a great summer. You deserve it. Take care. Nice to meet you all.